Hello, everyone.
Amy, are you doing any type of an intro? I'm so sorry.
I'm going to do an intro. I'm just waiting a second. The attendee thing is going up pretty quick here. So let's give
I
it like
will.
10
And
more seconds.
you just told me that like 2 minutes
It's
ago.
totally fine. Totally fine. Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to CNS Connect webinar series. My name is Amy Smith and I am the Director of Certifications for the ANA and the BCNS. And today I am joined by Meg Bowman and a lovely panel of CNS candidates and CNSs. And we are going to talk about thriving as a neurodivergent nutritionist. If you are a CNS, you can get 1 CE for today's presentation. And I will put a survey link in the chat the last 5 minutes of the webinar. And if you have questions or comments throughout the chat or throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat feature. And if anyone raises their hand and wants to speak or anything like that, we can definitely unmute you. So I'm going to turn it over to Meg and let her introduce her lovely panel of speakers today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. As I was telling Amy before we got on this recording, it was literally 5 minutes ago that I went, oh crap, I have to be on a webinar. So I made her wait while I changed my shirt. I turned off my video, of course, but here we are. So I'm really glad to have you here. I proposed doing this workshop a while ago because you know what I have noticed over the last hot minute since I've been doing this, that there appears to be more neurodivergence in the CNS community than maybe in the regular population. And I'm not quite sure why, but I'm here for it. So I thought I would just gather some people today and have a conversation. So there's 3 topics that we want to cover today. We are going to talk about how neurodivergence works in session with the client, how it works with all of those non-client facing things we do, and then we're going to end up with the things that you might want to think about in terms of getting your CNS and how you might structure things a little differently. So what I want to focus on today is really this mindset of trying to emphasize our strengths and limit our vulnerabilities so that we can really find the way to work that works best for us. So thank you to the panelists. So I'm going to go just around the room, and if you could give us a very brief introduction, tell us your name. Everybody seems to want to know where people are located, so please do that. And then also I'd love to hear just a sentence or 2 about what your practice is, and then we will dive in. So we're going to start with Mary Virginia, and then we'll go Mandy, Robin, Jennifer, and Nikki.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Meg. So I'm Mary Virginia Kaufman, and I use both names. I am Mary Virginia. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, which usually just goes by Atlanta, kind of like Madonna. But squirrel. So my practice is mental health nutrition, and all of the pillars that go into that: gut health and metabolic health, blood sugar balance, all of those kinds of things. And then I have an special interest in the lifestyle focus of things like heart math and meditation, sleep, obviously, time in nature, all of those kinds of things. But I'm really, really interested in nervous system alignment. So that's a lot of my work.
Cool, thank you. Mandy?
Thank you, Meg. And like Mary Virginia, I am also having some squirrel moments here. So thanks for the grace. But my name is Mandy Garcia. I am based in South Florida. And my practice is centered around athletic nutrition and performance. And I also serve clients within the 40 to 60 age range with a different conditions. Primarily, nervous system regulation has been one of the top priorities for the clients that I see. And of course, gut health is another large pillar where they come looking to me for assistance, and a whole bunch of others that have been wonderful to work with and learn from as well, because that's part of our role to also learn from our clients. And so thank you for this opportunity to be here with you today, and I will pass it on to my colleague.
All right, Robin, you're up.
Hi, I am Robin Gatter. I'm in West Palm Beach, Florida. So Mandy, we'll have to talk. Um, I have a practice that focuses on, like some of the others, mental health nutrition. I have a lot of neurodivergent clients. That's sort of obviously a soft place in my heart for them. And I also work with clients with eating disorders because those two worlds intersect quite a bit. And then also clients that have, metabolic diseases and cardiovascular, all those kind of things. So I find those overlap a lot anyway.
Shocking, really. Shocking. And Robin, you teach at...
Oh, yeah. I do that. Sonoran University of Health Sciences. I'm adjunct. I'm the teaching kitchen lab instructor.
Yeah. All right, Jennifer, your turn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Woolwand. I'm located in San Jose, California, and I practice transcription wellness. I also focus and have a special interest in mental health and stress and gut health. And I've also recently become really interested in genetics, so I'm hoping to kind of delve into that in the near future as well.
That's great. Thank you. And Nikki.
So very similarly to everyone else, I feel. My name is Nikki Swersh. I am Northeast, so I'm located up in Jersey, North Jersey to be specific, if anyone's curious on it. But so I also focus within mental health, and I like to joke that it's a sprinkle of thyroid, gut, and hormonal, which, just like everyone else said, everything kind of very much so connects when it comes to that world.
Doesn't it, though? All right. Well, let's dive in. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is neurodivergence in the session with the clients. And I really intentionally, when I did, for those of you in the audience, I did provide the panelists questions in advance in case they wanted to look at those. But I intentionally started out with strengths always. So when you think about your special recipe of neurodivergence, because we all are different, we all have different phenotypes, if you will. What do you think are the strengths that you see when you're actually in session with client? Did anybody particularly want to answer that one? Mickey, go ahead, please.
So one of the reasons I kind of raised my hand on this one is because I feel like it also kind of like leads into the vulnerabilities a little bit. Because I feel like a lot of it is very both-sided. It's two sides of the coin. It's being able to collect the puzzle pieces, right? Because it's such a scatterbrain type thing. You can kind of start as you're listening, as you're talking, as you're taking notes, because that's also one of my strengths is the note taking, because I can type while I'm listening and talking. Being able to listen to what they're saying, type notes, think about, what they said while they're talking about family history, while they're telling you what their mom just said, and then connecting it in the dot with some of their symptoms. It kind of creates that ability of being multifaceted within one very specific moment. And that, with the creativity, I feel like are kind of the biggest strengths around at least my type of neurodivergence.
Absolutely. Anybody else have thoughts on that one? Please, Mandy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to mirror everything that Nikki said because I do experience that while I'm in session with clients. But another aspect that I feel is something that is a definite strength is my ability to tap into that client's energy, because most of my session work is virtual. And for a lot of people, they may feel difficult to connect with somebody through a digital medium, but I find it very easy for me to look at all the different nuances with their body language, the tone of their voices, to really tap into what they're not saying, to tell me more of that story that we need to gather as clinicians to give them the most appropriate recommendations. So having that empathy and the just ability to tap in, I would just elaborate further.
Yeah, being able to really kind of experience the fullness of it all at once. And kind of take a picture and say, okay, let's consolidate that. I think I've seen that too. There's observations that I make that the client goes, huh, I never thought about that way. Anybody else have any different strengths?
So I think that I connect dots differently than other people do sometimes. In fact, Meg, what you said triggered me to think of it that way. Made me see that that I do see this landscape, And Mandy, I like the way you said feel the energy, because there's a lot of intuition in the work that I do. And there is a lot of heart connection, even through the screen, because I'm primarily virtual as well. And pulling those in and then connecting the dots and presenting it back to the client. Oops, and there goes my light. In a way they hadn't thought of it before. And it creates an access point for them to the transformation they want to make that didn't exist before.
Absolutely. Actually, something just popped into my brain, and I would really be curious. I did not prep you for this, but here we go. This is the webinar to do that on. And you're the people to do it with, because you can think better with adrenaline. So, I feel like one of the elements that I lean into hugely is my hyper focus. I will get fixated on something. Right now it is mushrooms. And I will learn everything that I can about mushrooms. And eventually that will shift. But when I leave that world, I will know a really ton about whatever that topic is. I'm just wondering if anybody else feels like the hyper focus is something that helps you. Robin, do you want to do that one?
Yeah, I think that deep dive, right? You get a client with something and you're like a dog with a bone, right? You're just going to figure it out. You're just going to look at everything. And before you know it, it's like 7:30 at night. You're like, whoa, I have been in every like research doc and every website you can think of. And, that for the client, that's great. You just won't give up until you kind of figure it out.
Yeah. Nikki, you were nodding too. Did you have something different?
No, I'm nodding because that was one of the two sides of the coin thing I really thought about a lot when I looked at the questions prior, because it is, right? It's that hyperfixation, that hyper focus that you're going to do everything you can to get your answer. But the other side of that coin too, right? It's the time blindness, where you start doing all these things. Next thing you know, just like, Robin just said, it's 7:30 p.m. and you're like, I have been going wild looking up this like one specific mushroom for the last 8 hours. Everything about it. And it's, again, great for the client. But two, it's finding that kind of time management around it, which, kind of leans a little bit more into the vulnerability side of it.
Well, that's a great segue. Maybe we can just go there. So I think what I heard you say was that time blindness is an issue for you. Good Lord, I know that's an issue for me. I hope people, really honestly, in the audience, if you have questions, this is the place to ask. If you want to make comments or observations, me too, yes, this is the place to ask or comment. Time blindness. Woo, almost lost it. Anybody want to comment on how you deal with that? Because that is a vulnerability that I think a lot of us share. Go ahead, Mary Virginia. I think you were going first, and then Jennifer. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, there we go. Sure, I am happy to. And I'm taking my light down because it's now fallen twice. So hopefully you can still see me. Yeah, the whole time management, I think, has been that is the thing throughout my life that has been the toughest for me, is recognizing how much time has passed and how much time I have. And so I am that's actually a current focus of mine, is creating circumstances where I am I have external and internal things working on it. But I routinely run over with my clients. I routinely spend, much too much time down the rabbit hole. When I was in grad school, and now it's reflected in my notes, I just spend too much time on them. 45 minutes has passed, and I'm like, I don't have time to be doing this. Why am I still doing this? So yeah, I would say that's a significant issue, and I was so pleased to discover there are ways of handling it.
Can we ask what those are?
You can ask. So, yeah, and I'm just now putting it in place. And so my daughter, actually, the ADHD runs in my family, and I didn't know that was me until I was way old before that understanding came to me. And what a significant relief it was to understand that my brain simply works differently, because I've been square pegging myself into that round hole for a long time. It was really uncomfortable, and I was judged a lot because I was not, or I was both judged a lot and thought I was judged a lot. So it was a really poignant mix of beating myself up over this. And then I found that this is where I am. So now what I am working on it, as I said, I'm discovering it. My daughter recommended that I use a timer on my phone. So now I can set a time for something that where I want to be hyper-focused and know that I don't have to keep track of the time. That's very helpful. And then I'm also putting in place some skill sets, some brain restructuring work, neurological restructuring work, having to do with using my eyeballs. So I mentioned about, actually, I guess it was before we started, there is a technique where you center yourself with a little bit of breath work. It does not have to be an hour and a half of breath work, but even 30 seconds of just breath work. And then you look in the near distance, you focus on something in the near distance for 10 to 30 seconds, middle distance, and then far distance. And it works with the inner clock to set it differently. And so I'm working on restructuring my brain now. I'm still new at it, but I do see a difference in my time management skills. So there's just a couple of them.
That's a great, I thought you were going somewhere totally different with the eyeball thing. I'm actually experimenting with this myself. I'm wearing glasses. There's a practice near me that like changes the way that your brain interprets light and sound and space, because I run into things constantly, right? And it's using glasses hilariously. So that's where I thought you were going. Jennifer, how do you deal with the time blindness?
Yeah, so what I've been trying to do is when I go into each day, like whether it be working with clients and appointments or just in general, really, kind of thinking ahead, what are the things I need to do today? What are the things I need to cover in this appointment? Writing them down. And then I have just tons of things in my calendar, alarms that go off, like just because I know that I get kind of hyper focused and I don't really realize. And I even have an issue sometimes hitting snooze. I'm like, oh no, I need to keep doing this thing. So I'm just really having that time at the beginning with notes to know I don't want to make sure I want to make sure that I don't miss anything that I need to do, and then having those reminders just as an extra reminder, and then you can cross them off on your list and it feels good that you did something.
So good, right? We had a couple questions that I want to answer. Mary Virginia is gonna put the name of her technique into the chat in just a little bit here when she looks it up. And the other question that we had was somebody asked, do you struggle with planning how long things take? Yes. Who would like to speak about that? I feel like I am always shy or too far. I am never on the mark. Go ahead, Nikki.
So Meg, you actually provided this resource to me and it's been so helpful. So it's an app that you can add onto your calendar. It's called a Motion app. And so it's a really cool thing. So essentially when you have a task, right? Say you have to write a protocol for a client. I always overestimate because I know myself how Meg was like, I'm always too shy or too much. I always am like, that'll take me 20 minutes and it takes me like 5 hours. So I've learned I always have to well overestimate myself. But when you type a task in, you can at the bottom add like how much time it'll take in priority, which that's my key piece on this, where you can put the priority. And so if it's something like, I just got to make sure I put time to wash the dog or something where it's like a low priority type thing, you can add it and it'll block the time off on your calendar. But say it's a protocol, you can say, okay, on average, these take me, an hour in case I hyperfocus, in case anything else happens, let me put 2 hours. And you can put like all at one time, or it's okay if I break this up because I need to do everything at once because going back to a task is really challenging for me. And so it creates a space where it blocks off your calendar,
But if you don't check it off that you don't do it, it automatically moves it. And it also doesn't mark as busy. So clients can still book into that time, say if it's during a time where you want to take clients. So it's a great app. It's a great resource. And it doesn't really answer the question of how I estimate time, because if anyone has tips on that, I'd love to learn myself. But I always overdo it just in case.
Yeah, that's safe. Yeah. Anybody else have a different technique with you? Go ahead, Robin, please.
Well, speaking of apps that you've recommended, Timebro. Timebro is a good one.
They just changed their name, which is now also a bad name. So it's now Memtime. MEMTIME, which is a equally bad name as
Yeah,
Timebro.
of course. So, and we can get into it when we get into the part of getting your hours kind of thing. But if you're trying to estimate, they do have free trials. So what you could do is load it on, and then it tracks the time that you take to do certain tasks. It kind of sees what you're doing. So if you are building a protocol, like, how long do I usually take? Like, I have no idea. It will say it took you an hour and 25 minutes, or how long, how many hours, it did take me to do this. So that was really interesting for me to see when I used it in other purposes, like, how long am I really taking for this? And I said, we can talk about it a little more when we get to like tracking hours and stuff.
Yeah, it really is I'm actually going to show the tool if I can, because it doesn't actually fix for me the time blindness. I still don't know how long things are going to take, but I am able to slightly better predict. Let me show you what this looks like if I can. So making sure we're not breaking HIPAA. Okay, so this is what the app looks like. And what's really cool is it is saying what I'm doing, what's on my calendar. It's also literally looking at what I'm actually doing. And then I can go in and say, oh yes, this was this task. That's what I was doing. And so it's not like you have to remember to turn off or on timers. You don't. It's just going to watch what you're doing online and account for that, which has really been helpful, knowing how I spend my time, because sometimes I go into that hole and I'm like, how did I get nothing done today? And then I can see how, and I can see what I did get done, because I always did get something done.
Yeah, there was a lot more distraction websites than I had admitted to myself. When I looked, I was like, oh, that was a lot of time on Twitter. Like, I thought I just looked at a couple of things and that was like 20 minutes, so you can kind of see where you're landing.
I did look at my calendar before I shared this, because I wanted to make sure it wasn't like TikTok, because that was a possibility too. That does happen. Yeah. Okay. Well, what else? I think I want to go to a really specific question, which is, when you're working with clients, how much do you choose to self-disclose about your neurodivergence? Anything at all? And if so, what? Does anybody have an answer to that one? Go ahead, Mary Virginia, please.
So this actually happened to me with a client this week. It's a client I've had for a long time. And I typically hesitate. This session is for the client. The session isn't for me. But with this woman, I've known her for a long time, and she was really struggling at a point. And so I described my own struggle and then my process around that struggle, and reframed some things for her as a result of that. And in that instance, she visibly relaxed. And as we kind of moved through the last few minutes of the session, and then at the very end of the session, she said, "Thank you so much for sharing your personal journey. It made such a difference to me to hear that." And it just really had a big impact on her. But it wouldn't be appropriate for every single client. For her, it was good. I have another client who is who suffers some pretty severe ADHD, and he came back from a he's a guide. He was a guide up in Alaska, and he came back with a very severe dopamine depletion. And his old behaviors came back in full force, and he was quite discouraged by it. So we, reviewed it, and I was able to describe dopamine depletion and that the time that it takes to come back and how his ADHD. And then I again drew a parallel with some of my own experience, and it just made it sink for him. He got it in a way he wouldn't have otherwise. But again, it wouldn't be appropriate for everyone.
Yeah. Anybody else have a different boundary? Mandy, please. Yeah.
So for me, I don't disclose whatsoever with clients anything that I am personally dealing with, because to your point, Mary Virginia, that time is dedicated to their needs. And there's been several instances where I have been personally struggling because of the surroundings that a client has met me virtually with. There was a lot of background noise. They're used to living in a certain amount of chaos, and that was just so triggering for me. And I felt my eyes looking so many different places, and I couldn't focus, right? But I had to pull up myself by my bootstraps and just kind of grit and bear it and try to get to the finish line. But at the end of those sessions, I was exhausted, like completely exhausted, depleted. I couldn't even see straight because all the words started jumping off the screen and I couldn't do anything. So in those cases where I am too stimulated, I need to really take a step back and refill my own cup, turn off all the sound, do a meditation, go outside before I can get myself ready for my next client. But I keep that to myself. So that's just how I go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Robin, looked like your hand was up.
Yeah, like Mandy, I don't talk about like the struggles within the session, like that I'm like having trouble focus, any of those things. Like that's none of, they don't need to know any of that. I think like Mary Virginia, there's certain cases, like I get a lot of people who where their certain challenges are is maybe, just even grocery shopping or putting together a meal and all those kind of things. And then I think, they know my background as a chef. And so they feel like there's a lot of shame that was involved, when you can't do some of these functions, right? And while that's not where my particular challenge is, because that was my profession, sometimes I don't put together what they think I'm probably putting together for meals and stuff anyway. So like sharing that, like, even for me, it's not always, I don't always hit the mark, and that's okay. And that was my profession. And even I don't do that. So it makes them feel better. Like, oh, she was a chef and she had, grilled cheese and, carrot sticks for dinner. So that's okay,
That is okay. Yeah.
So that in that kind of situation, I think that's okay to kind of share that.
Yeah. I actually have a different approach. I share with every single client, but I share what is going to impact them or what has the potential to impact them. So I say, listen, I got ADHD. How is that going to impact you in two ways? One, we are going to make an appointment and I'm going to make you look at your email to make sure I didn't flip the day and time, because I'm real good at that. And if you ever see an appointment that I've sent you that you're like, this is not what we said, my brain, let me know. And two, if you send me a message and I see it and I'm not in a place to respond to it, I might forget it. And it doesn't mean that I don't care. It doesn't mean that I don't want to respond. It means that sincerely it has left my brain and I have no idea that you've messaged me. So if you can please do me the grace of sending me, another email, just say nudge, nudge. I just want to make sure that this doesn't mean that I don't want to answer. It literally is just how my brain works. So that's the disclosure that I choose to make, because I never want them to think that it is them, not me. It's horrible when a client shows up when you flip the day and time. I don't know if anybody does that, but that is the worst. And they're like, where are you? And I hate that. Well, let's talk about outside the client session if we can for a minute. So just because I'm not managing our time well, I'd like to broaden it a little bit. Does anybody have a strength or a vulnerability that you've identified with the work of a nutritionist that's outside the client session? So this is the business management piece. This is, all of those kind of things that happen outside client session. Anybody have anything that they have? Mary Virginia, please.
Let's go back to time management
Do we have to?
and
Yeah. Okay.
deadlines. I realized that it's actually valuable to have a deadline. And I don't manage deadlines. Setting a deadline for myself, it is, I don't have to meet my expectations. I don't have to meet my expectations necessarily, except of perfectionism, but that's a different conversation. I've discovered that I really work better when I'm in community, and that by creating a community of people I'm working with, I'm good at working with people with setting an external deadline. And then I can meet the deadline because I know that other person is expecting me to do that. So there is a big vulnerability for me, is self-creating deadlines. That's really hard as a solo practitioner. So I have been working on creating collaborations where then I have an external commitment, and I feel strongly about meeting external commitments. That's a value that I have. And so a deadline is set, they're expecting something from me, and then the ball moves forward. And that's satisfying. Then I feel like I've met, my goals. So
what a great way to work to your strengths, though. I mean, that's such a beautiful adaptation to work toward your strengths,
Well, it took me a minute. It took me a minute. And so I'm really building that now. And it's very satisfying when I get it in place, which, you have to get it in place before you can actually act on it. Yeah. So, but those things that I have in place, it's very satisfying, and it's really, really, really nice to work with other people.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a strength or a vulnerability? Go ahead, Nikki, please.
So I refer to it as analysis paralysis. So when it comes to like any kind of business related decisions or things like that, where it's, what system do I want to use, or what do I want to shift or change? I'll go down 15 million different rabbit holes. And again, then that time, the hyper focus and all that stuff to try to figure out what decisions I want to make. And then it turns into this, like, there's too many things, there's too many options, I'm just going to sit. So that's kind of a big piece of the vulnerability. And then, kind of like what was said with everything we've talked about today, it's finding which pieces of the things we can use to still move forward. And some days also creating the grace of just like, you know what, I need to step away from this and look back at it at a later moment in time.
Yeah. Anybody else? Go ahead, Jennifer, please. And then we'll get you, Robin.
So kind of strength and vulnerability wrapped in one. Strength being just being extremely detail oriented and just having so many thoughts about everything. And I just always say I have like so many tabs open in my brain. And so sometimes having so much, it's hard to really do, kind of take each thought and idea and go with it without getting distracted with all the other ones. And so something that kind of helps me with that is, again, like making a list and maybe even prioritizing my ideas. And then sometimes even that, looking at each idea is just so overwhelming. It's like, well, how do I even start that? And then that becomes just so much. So then even breaking it down even more, like into really, really small steps sometimes, so that I'll actually start the process. Otherwise, I just kind of get in that paralysis of, oh, this is just too much. So yeah, I think just breaking them down as small as possible sometimes is really helpful.
Absolutely. Robin, what was yours?
I think that I get stuck in that analysis paralysis too. And just meeting with a group that I formed a little mastermind, and just saying, don't let, perfect be the enemy of good. Like we want perfection, right? That's how our brains are wired. Like we have to do it perfectly. And there's that rejection, sensitive dysphoria as well, right? Like, oh, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be horrible. The other thing I struggle with is without the lack of dopamine, right? If there's a task that is long, right? So applying to credential some insurance plans can be, Medicare, let's just say it's a couple hours. And like, how am I going to focus for that long to do that? Or I was learning to process, submit claims. Like that was painful. Like if your brain's like going, I don't want to do this anymore. And you have to stick with it because it'll bounce you out of the system if you don't complete it. So those are struggles. And you just have to make sure you're well hydrated. You ate something before you did it, right? Like maybe you exercised before, like get out those jitters and then you can, go and do that task.
Absolutely. Mandy, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch again upon the perfectionism quality, which is, as we all know, a strength and a weakness. Is another leg of my practice is within corporate wellness. So I find myself doing quite a lot of research and putting together presentations for my employer groups. And I can spend literally an entire day formatting one slide with alignments and redoing fonts and images and the whole 9 yards. So at this stage in the game, I'm forcing myself to leave imperfections in my slide deck and calculate them in there to some degree. Because, all right, another thing about me, I'm also like a music nerd and I love production and the whole back end type of thing with audio production. And there's a genre of music, many of you may be aware of it, it's called lo-fi music. The whole concept on lo-fi is that you're taking these lower quality sounds and putting in imperfection as part of the track. To some degree, there's going to be some type of timing that's off within the song itself, but when all the pieces of the puzzle come together, it's melodically in place and it's still very beautiful. So for me, I am programming in those imperfections. And it's taking that weight off of my shoulders to a certain degree, but I still see how it all fits and it's still going to look great. And my clients will not know the difference either way because they're not in my brain. So that's something that I found is helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love that concept of just embedding imperfection and this is what it is. I think from my perspective, I maybe have a different journey than some people. I was diagnosed 3 years ago as an adult and, had always wondered like, why couldn't I get stuff done? And when I hit my diagnosis, I really was so lucky that my therapy provider was like, well, we are about to figure out ways to emphasize your strengths and get the things that are vulnerabilities off your plate. And so from the get-go, I have just invested. I spent a lot of time with a body double, like one of my buddies. We would schedule sessions and we would show up to the session. Hi, how you doing? Turn off the volume and do work. And man, you do feel like you got to stay and do the work if somebody's potentially looking at you on Zoom. So I did that for a while. These days, I just pay for coaching weekly. Here we go. I use Commit Action for those of you that are interested, and I meet with a coach once a week and we identify the 3 top priorities, which are not the fun priorities. I've learned that I got to do the eat the frog priorities. Have you guys heard that model? Like eat the frog first, the things you don't want to do, because I can easily do the things I want to do. But we identify 3 like eat the frog things. And it is really helpful you wouldn't have to pay for that. You could just do that with somebody, but it's really helpful to have that type of support for me. Yeah. Thank you, Amy. Let me just check yeah, so let's go ahead to, let's talk about the CNS process if we can, because there was a question about, how do you manage this? There are many places that I can imagine are difficult, but even something like tracking. But I would love to hear from each of you, what you've found challenging and then how you have moved forward anyway. Anybody want to start? Go ahead, Nikki, please.
I feel like I've just been starting, so I'm like, I might as well. So my brain almost works the opposite. I'm very good at tracking in details. And so the big difference and like the big asterisk on that, it has to be tracking in a way that works for my brain. And so the tracker itself, I kind of ended up creating my own that worked for me to be able to get the information I needed to then plug into the tracker. But when I say that, that was after 6 months of tracking the other way. So it was very much so a way, and, you know, tracking and same thing with studying and everything else. It took a very long time of doing things the wrong way, or the wrong way for me and the way my brain works, to go, okay, well, what is going to work for me? Because obviously this isn't. And so that's kind of one of like a double answer kind of, where a lot of it was very, very challenging. And so it was taking what was challenging and going, okay, let me take a step back, and what is it that is going to work for me? Like, what have I seen works, what doesn't, and how can I shift it so I can get it done?
Absolutely. And I think that is also just, frankly, a beautiful model for our clients too. I really do, you know, because we might say something and the client can't do it, and it's not the client's fault. We got to figure out how to shift it so that they can do it. And it's lovely when we can give ourselves that grace too. Yeah. Anybody else have a way that you managed to get the CNS done, get your certs done? Please, Mary Virginia. Yeah.
I did use the tracker, and the way I handled that was that at the end of the day, I made it a brushing my teeth action. I didn't wait until the next day to brush my teeth. I brushed my teeth. It was the time to do it. If my work was over, then I needed to fill in the CNS tracker, and that kept me honest. It also kept it a manageable task, because all I had to fill in was today. So I didn't have to remember yesterday and the day before and all that kind of thing. And I didn't have a note somewhere else, because I am famous for writing a note somewhere. And I have about 1,000 of them. And like, which one was it? And they're all notes that are having nothing to do with each other, all on the same page. So the daily tracking is the thing that really kept me on point. And then the part that I found hard was studying for the exam. And I didn't start as early as other people. I kept putting it off. I have an issue with seeing a big task and being overwhelmed by it, and also with the hyperfocus. So if it's a big task and it's hyperfocus and I don't have time, like I never have time for it, so I would never get started. And I discovered that one, my memory is darn good because of that hyperfocus, right? Things stick. And I took several passes over material, so it wove together and stayed, versus big study sessions. And then of course it helped to get together. Meg, I was in supervision with you, and it was helpful to get together with other people and talk about the information, because it was a different way of weaving it into the memory.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mandy, please.
So I'll also touch upon studying for the exam, because for me, I had severe test anxiety all throughout undergrad, grad school, and of course, leading up to taking the exam itself for the CNS. And just the thought before I even began to study, I would get so nervous and all of my sensories would just go haywire. So I took a different approach, similar to what Mary Virginia did, but I also made an intentional decision to make sure that I was calm and in my prefrontal cortex instead of hanging out in my amygdala, because I knew speaking logically and thinking logically was going to be the way that I could actually see the questions on that screen and think. Because if I went into that place in my emotions and the anxiety, everything would get fluttered. So I would train myself during my study sessions to be in a place of calmness on the computer, going through the practice exams, and then taking whatever breaks I needed to just stay chill as much as possible. And so by the time the test actually came around, I walked into the testing center. I felt great. I was like, oh, okay, I can do this. This is not going to be a problem. And every sentence, every multiple choice, I could see it clearly, nothing jumbled, and I was able to pass.
I remember you talking about prepping like that, and I was like, oh, that's smart. That's smart. Like, I actually do think sometimes, the best advice you can give is send somebody to Starbucks or a really busy coffee shop and take a test there. Because when you're in that testing center, like, there's people walking behind you. There's stuff going on, unless you're at a really unpopulated one. Anybody else have how to complete the CNS? Okay, we'll do Jennifer and then Robin. I saw you.
So just going off of studying for the exam, so for me, I struggle with when something is so overwhelming, getting started is hard for me because I just know there's just so much. And so when it came to studying, sometimes I would just tell myself, I'm just going to spend literally 10 minutes studying. And it wasn't always easy, but if I force myself to do just the 10 minutes, most of the time I would continue and go longer, because once I'm starting and feeling accomplished, I'm doing what I need to do, then I'm able to continue. Whereas if I told myself, I need to spend all day studying, I might never get started because it's just too overwhelming.
Absolutely. And Robin?
All right, I'll be vulnerable because I'm sure it may help somebody else, but I can probably say with confidence, and Meg, you can back this up, I'm probably one of TCI's top 5 worst trackers ever. I'm sure
you got there, and that is the important part.
But it was a hard road, and even though the information was, stored in Practice Better or the system I was using at my job of seeing clients, it wasn't properly in the tracker all the time. And I would get anxious and sweaty, and I was overwhelmed. But thank you, Amy, when the board switched the tracker and made it a different system, what I did is I put it into Google Docs or Google Slide, whatever, sheets there. And it made it so much easier. One, I didn't have to hit save, which was always my thought, like, oh, what if I do all this work and I don't hit save and it's in Excel? So took that off the table. And then seeing at the top the numbers change, right? Your hours keep getting higher and higher. That hit that reward center, that dopamine in my brain. So it made me want to put them in, because I was like, what's the number going to be today? Because it was front and center at the top. And so it made it like, I want to say like a game, but like it kind of. And so I was totally a different person once that came out.
Yeah. And Robin, really, do not feel bad about it. This is something so frequently, like, I can tell you, there's been a number of people in the process of getting supervision, like we do CNS supervision. In the process of that, they're having such issues with their tracker. And I'm like, do we have a little neurodivergence? So some people have actually gotten diagnosed due to the difficulty they have. And I promise that when the supervisors see that, like, the first instinct is to be like, okay, this brain works differently. Like, what could we do? What could they do differently? How can we get this solved? Because really, sincerely, there's so much value in a neurodivergent brain working with clients that it is so worth going through that process of figuring out how to make it work for you. Because once you do, it is such freedom, right? That now you can do that sort of thing. If you wanted to get another cert, like, how to do it. So I love that. We had a question that was such a good question. Somebody asked, I didn't prep the panelists for this, so nobody might choose to answer. Is anybody willing to talk about their own diagnosis journey? And I'm going to add a little element to it, what it changed for you. Nikki, go ahead.
I will happily talk about this because I was also recently, like the last few years, diagnosed, similar to Meg. So when I was in college, I felt like everything was a struggle, and I didn't understand why I had such a hard time, because I was in a major I enjoyed. My undergrad is also nutrition. So I was in a major I enjoyed. I was doing things I really enjoyed doing, and I felt like I couldn't get it. And I didn't know why. And I felt like everyone around me was having the easiest time and just doing all the things. And I was like, I can't get it together. And so it took me a very, very long time. By very long time, it took me 8 years to go back for my master's, because I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. And so then when I went back for my master's, again, it was that same feeling, but it felt different. And because it was more primarily online, I was able to use different tools. It had also been 8 years of picking up tips and tricks, which again, didn't know I had ADHD yet. It was just tips and tricks I picked up myself. And then I got very, very lucky in the sense of I had a therapist who kind of turned around, similar to what Meg said, and was like, let's take a look at something. And then I started kind of talking to different people and being a little bit more vulnerable about some of the things that I felt and that was going on. And eventually people were like, have you ever been tested for ADHD? And when I got the diagnosis, it was this thought of like, oh, it's not me. I'm not like, right? Like, I'm not the problem. It's not me. It's just the way my brain functions. And so it's not what's wrong with me. It's how can I do things to make it where I can be successful? Because it's not a problem. It's, oh, my brain just works a little bit differently. So what things can I shift to make it accessible for me? And I did read the question on the side because it is, and work schedule does make it difficult. And my biggest, and honestly, it was, when I say a life changer, that's an understatement. Ask your PCP, right? That's what I ended up doing. My therapist mentioned it. And so I went to PCP and was like, I'd love to get tested. I'm struggling very badly. I have the inattentive type. And I was hitting a point where sending an easy 5-minute email was taking me days. And I was like, I just can't get anything done anymore. And so I, blocked off the hour, went, and it was because then it gives you an answer and it helps you feel seen, and exactly what we try to do for clients, you then get that feeling. So yeah, it's
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that. We have time probably for one more. Anybody else want to share their diagnosis journey? I'll share just a little bit about, I'm sorry. Did I see hands? Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer, please.
So I was very recently diagnosed, like within the last 4 to 6 months. So it's been also life-changing for me because throughout my life, I was realizing certain types of tasks were difficult for me, or I'd be processing it more slowly than others. And so I would kind of always just think, oh, something's wrong with me. Why can't I do that? And focusing on kind of like as a negative thing about me, like, oh, I can't do this in the way that I see others doing it. And so now that I have this diagnosis, I can look at it in a way of, I have certain strengths though, and focusing on those and how it's a positive thing. And then knowing that, that my brain works a little differently, finding ways that work for me and not feeling, I guess, wrong about it, or feeling like it's not the right way, because it's more important to do what works for you, and that's okay, and that's what you should do. And so, yeah, I think just having the diagnosis helps you to focus on the positive about it.
Absolutely. And I think there's also no wrong path in just making that assumption. You're here in this room or listening to this recording. If you haven't been diagnosed, make the assumption and learn a little bit about it and see how things change for you. That is how my diagnosis kind of started. My therapist was like, well, maybe, why don't you read this book? And she gave Sari Solden's Women with ADHD. I know you all have seen this thing. Like, it's a radical guide for women with ADHD. She gave me that and I read it and I was like, oh, it's me. And it was just huge, because then I could go back to my business partners and I could go back to my team and say, hey, I want to change how I structure my work. And it took a couple years to get it where I want it to be, but man, it is freeing when you really can work in a way that fits your strengths, and then outsource to other people that have different brains the things that don't fit your strengths. It's just huge. Thank you, Amy, for posting that. Does anybody have any last minute thoughts that you think a neurodivergent nutritionist, like one sentence, you think they need to know? Okay, we're going to go Mandy and then Mary Virginia.
Okay, really quick, guys. On top of everything else, find a way to love yourself and give yourself grace. Find a way to give that gift to yourself every single day, because when you're built a little differently, it may it may be difficult to find other people who understand who you are and how you operate in this world. But by loving yourself and seeing all the amazing gifts that come with thinking and living differently, know that those are inherent superpowers that are going to make the biggest difference in other people's lives if you allow them to. So I'll just end there.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Mary Virginia, please.
I agree. That really was beautifully said, Mandy. Thank you. I would say for me, and I hope you will do it too, is that understanding my ADHD and the way my brain functions, which is constantly being revealed to me. I mean, I am a mental health nutritionist and I do work with ADHD, but it made it personal for me. And when something is true for you, going out and finding the information that is going to make you feel better is also going to work for your clients. And so if you find it interesting, use it. Bring it into your work. It's going to make you a better practitioner. And I agree with Mandy that I have discovered that these things that I consider to be liabilities are really strengths. There are hidden strengths in them. That hyper focus that I have and that perfectionist streak, but also that it creates an engagement that I think sometimes people don't have. And I've been able to apply it to things that I really love. And it's made me a better practitioner. And I think it can do that for you.
Yeah, I do think I see that pretty frequently when I work with CNS candidates that are neurodivergent. They just have this level of, wow, sometimes walking in this world is hard for me. And they immediately can translate that into what is hard for the client. I don't have to explain empathy and they don't have to learn it. It's just instinctual, which makes rapport good. That's what I've seen. Yeah. Well, any last questions today? I think we got them mostly all. Amy?
Thank you all so much. This was really wonderful. I appreciate everyone sharing their experience. And I know everyone else enjoyed it. And I'm sorry, I realize now why you couldn't type in there, Meg, because the chat wasn't on. So now we've got it figured out. So if anyone has any last minute things they would like to add, please feel free. The CE survey is in the chat. And we have a couple more webinars coming up this year. I think there's 3 left. So please check out the link to see if there are any that you're interested in. And thank you all again so much for participating and sharing your time and your expertise with us. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for organizing, Meg.
Yeah. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.